My brother slapped my plate off the table and screamed, "You have 30 minutes to get out of my family," after discovering I refused to sell him my share of our grandmother's house so he could buy his third luxury car. He threw my food on the floor right in front of my 7-year-old daughter, claiming I didn't deserve to eat at his table since the house now belonged to him as the male heir. The roasted chicken and mashed potatoes splattered across my mother's cream carpet in slow motion. Lily's fork clattered to her plate, her small body going rigid in the chair beside me. Around the dining table, my parents sat frozen mid-chew. Derek's wife Vanessa held her phone steady, still recording for her Instagram story, and my brother stood over me with his chest heaving, veins bulging in his neck, a grotesque smile spreading across his face as he watched gravy seep into the expensive rug our grandmother had chosen 30 years ago. I didn't cry, didn't beg. Instead, I picked up my water glass with a steady hand, took a long drink, and set it down precisely in the center of my placemat. Then I stood, smoothed my scrub top I'd worn straight from my shift at the pediatric unit, and pulled the folded envelope from my purse, the one I'd been carrying for 3 weeks, waiting to see if Derek would show his true colors. He'd exceeded my worst expectations. I placed the envelope on the table in front of my parents and said clearly, "I'll be taking my daughter home now. Mom, Dad, you might want to read what's inside before Derek tells you his version." The smile slid off Derek's face like oil off water. "I'm Rebecca Morrison, a pediatric nurse who worked double shifts to put myself through nursing school while living in our grandmother's basement apartment. The same grandmother who raised Derek and me after our parents went through their messy divorce when we were kids. The same grandmother who left her beautiful 1920s Victorian in Portland's Laurelhurst neighborhood to both of us equally in her will 6 months ago. The same house Derek now believed was his alone because I'm just a woman, just a nurse, just a single mom who couldn't possibly understand property law or business. He had no idea that the envelope I'd just left contained copies of documents I'd discovered in grandmother's safe deposit box, documents that would unravel everything he'd built in the past 6 months. But first, he was going to learn what happens when you humiliate the wrong person in front of their child. The Sunday dinners at my parents' house had been a tradition since grandmother Martha passed in April. 6 months of forced family time where Derek arrived in whatever new luxury vehicle he'd acquired that month. Vanessa documented everything for her 12,000 Instagram followers. And I showed up exhausted from 12-hour shifts still in my scrubs because I had exactly 45 minutes between leaving the hospital and picking up Lily from her friend's house. Today, Derek had outdone himself, pulling up in a brand new BMW X7 that cost more than I made in a year. He'd spent the entire meal before the explosion describing his plans for the house. "The market's hot right now," he'd announced, cutting into his steak with aggressive precision. "If we list grandmother's place this week, we could get close to 900,000. My guy says with the right staging, maybe more." I'd been focused on cutting Lily's chicken into smaller pieces, making sure she ate her vegetables, trying to enjoy one peaceful family dinner. "I'm not selling, Derek. I already told you that last month." His knife screeched across the plate. "Don't be stupid, Rebecca. What are you going to do with half a house? You can't afford to buy me out, and I'm not interested in being your landlord. I'm not asking you to be my landlord. I'm saying I'm not selling my half." That's when Vanessa had looked up from her phone, her perfectly microbladed eyebrows raised. "But Derek needs the money for the investment property in Lake Oswego. The deal closes in 3 weeks. My mother had set down her fork. "What investment property?" Derek's jaw clenched. "Vanessa, not now." He turned to me with that smile I'd seen him use on difficult customers, all teeth and dead eyes. "Rebecca, be reasonable. You're living in that tiny apartment with Lily. Don't you want something better for her? Your half of the sale would be enough for a down payment on a decent place." "I have a place. And I'm not selling grandmother's house so you can buy another property you can't afford." The mask cracked. "Can't afford? I make 3 times what you do, little sister. Some of us have real careers. Some of us also have real debt." I shouldn't have said it. I knew better. But the condescension in his voice, the way he'd looked at Lily like she was something inconvenient, it broke my usual filter. His face went red. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" "It means I know about the Mercedes you leased last year that you're 3 payments behind on. I know about the credit cards. I know about the loan you took against your 401k. I'd done my research. When Derek had first started pushing me to sell, I'd felt something was off. A friend from nursing school whose husband was a financial analyst had shown me how to pull public records, how to see the liens and judgments filed against my brother. The picture they painted wasn't of a successful businessman, but of someone living far beyond his means and sinking fast. Derek's hand had moved so fast I didn't see it coming. The slap to my plate sent food flying. Lily whimpered. My mother gasped. My father started to stand, but Derek was already shouting, "You don't know anything. That house belongs to the Morrison family. And I'm the one carrying the Morrison name forward. Not you with your loser ex-husband's name still attached to your kid. Not you playing nurse while I'm building wealth. Me, Derek. Stop this." My father's voice was weak, uncertain. He'd always deferred to Derek, his only son, the one who was supposed to take over the family name even though there was nothing to take over but a modest retirement and a paid-off Camry. "No, Dad, she needs to hear this. She needs to understand reality. Derek leaned down until his face was inches from mine. His breath smelled like the expensive bourbon he'd been drinking. You have 30 minutes to get out of my family. You're not a Morrison anymore. You're just some bitter single mom who can't get her life together. And that house is mine by right. Grandmother would have wanted the man of the family to have it. Vanessa's phone was still recording. She hadn't moved it an inch, capturing every word, every gesture. She'd post it later with some caption about family drama, not realizing she was documenting evidence. I stood, collected my daughter who was trembling and fighting back tears, and gathered my purse. My mother was crying quietly. My father looked lost. Vanessa had finally lowered her phone, perhaps sensing she'd captured something that shouldn't be shared. Rebecca, wait. My mother reached for me, but I stepped back. Read the envelope, Mom. All of it. Then call me if you want to know the truth about your son. Derek laughed. A harsh sound with no humor in it. Truth? You wouldn't know truth if it bit you. That house is mine and I'm going to prove it. I already have. Those words. I already have. They confirmed what I'd suspected. What the documents in grandmother's safe deposit box had suggested. Derek had done something. Something illegal. Something that was about to destroy him completely. I took Lily's hand and walked out into the October rain, leaving behind the family dinner, the spilled food, and the envelope that contained the first piece of Derek's unraveling. My daughter was quiet in the car, her small face reflected in the window as Portland's streetlights blurred past. Mommy, why was Uncle Derek so mean? I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Because some people think being loud makes them right, baby. But it doesn't. Are we really not family anymore? We're family, Lily. Real family doesn't throw food and yell. Real family shows up. And sometimes real family means choosing the people who choose you back. She seemed to accept this, turning back to the rain-streaked window. But I knew this moment would stay with her. The way trauma stays with children, shaping how they see the world and their place in it. Derek had humiliated me in front of my daughter, had tried to make her feel unwanted, had attempted to erase us from the Morrison family tree. He was going to pay for that, not with violence or screaming or dramatic confrontations, but with the cold, methodical application of law and evidence and consequences. The envelope I'd left contained copies of documents showing that grandmother had indeed left the house equally to both of us. What Derek didn't know was that I'd found a second set of documents, ones that showed he'd tried to forge a different will, one that left everything to him. What he also didn't know was that I'd already contacted Catherine Walsh, the family law attorney who volunteered at the hospital's legal aid clinic. Catherine, who had looked at my evidence and smiled the way a shark smiles before it strikes. The envelope I'd left contained only the appetizer. Inside were copies of grandmother Martha's original will, dated 2 years before her death, clearly stating that her house at 2847 Laurelhurst Drive would be divided equally between her 2 grandchildren, Rebecca Ann Morrison and Derek James Morrison. My mother called at 11 that night, after I'd finally gotten Lily to sleep despite her nightmares about Uncle Derek's red face. Rebecca, honey, I don't understand. Derek showed us a different will last month. It said everything went to him, with a small cash bequest to you of $20,000. I sat on my apartment couch, the one I'd bought third hand and reupholstered myself, and chose my words carefully. Mom, did that will look new, like it had been printed recently? A pause. Now that you mention it, yes. The paper was very white, very crisp, not like the yellowed copy you left us. That's because Derek's will is fake. Grandmother's original will was filed with her attorney Donald Peterson in 2021. I verified it myself last month when Derek started pressuring me to sell. My mother's breath caught. But Derek said Mr. Peterson retired and closed his practice, that the documents were lost. Mr. Peterson did retire, but he transferred all his files to his former associate, Jennifer Harding. She's the one who confirmed grandmother's real will for me. The one Derek showed you was created by a different lawyer, someone named Thomas Brenner. I don't understand. Why would Derek do this? I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of what I was about to do to my family. Because he's desperate for money, Mom. He's not the successful businessman he pretends to be. Those cars, that lifestyle, it's all built on debt. And when grandmother died, he saw a way out. Sell the house, keep all the money, pay off his creditors. But forging a will? That's illegal. That's criminal. Yes, it is. Which is why I've already contacted the Oregon State Bar Association about Thomas Brenner, and why I'm meeting with the district attorney's office next week. The silence on the line stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. Then quietly, your father is devastated. He keeps saying he failed as a father, that he raised a son who could do something like this. Dad didn't fail. Derek made his own choices. Derek's calling everyone, saying you're lying, that you're trying to steal his inheritance because you're jealous of his success. Vanessa posted something on Instagram about family betrayal and gold diggers. Of course she had. Vanessa's entire existence was performed for social media, every moment curated and captioned for maximum engagement. What she didn't realize was that her constant documentation was creating a digital paper trail that would be very useful very soon. I met with Catherine Walsh on Tuesday morning before my shift. Her office was modest but organized. Walls covered with certificates and photos of her with various judges and politicians. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, with steel gray hair cut in a practical bob, and eyes that missed nothing. "I've reviewed everything you gave me," she said, spreading documents across her desk. "Your grandmother's original will is ironclad. Filed properly, witnessed properly, no ambiguity. Derek's version has several problems beyond the obvious forgery issue. Like what? Like the fact that it was supposedly signed 3 months after your grandmother's death." Catherine tapped the date with one perfectly manicured nail. "Also, the witnesses listed don't exist. I checked. There's no one by those names in Oregon. Thomas Brenner appears to have simply invented them. How stupid is he? Arrogant, not stupid. He's gotten away with this kind of thing before, I suspect." I did some digging. Brenner has been practicing for 30 years, mostly small-time estate work and real estate closings. But there are complaints in his file. 3 different clients over the past decade claiming he encouraged them to contest wills or create new ones that benefited them unfairly. Nothing was ever proven. Investigations were dropped due to lack of evidence. So Derek picked the wrong lawyer for his scheme. Catherine smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. Derek picked a lawyer who was already under review by the Bar Association for unrelated issues. When I flagged this case to my contact there, they got very interested very quickly. Thomas Brenner's office was served with a subpoena yesterday afternoon for all files related to the Morrison estate. That fast? That fast. They've been building a case against him for 6 months. Your grandmother's will is just the latest example of his pattern of misconduct. He's looking at disbarment at minimum, possibly criminal charges. I felt something shift in my chest, a satisfaction that was almost physical. And Derek? Derek is looking at forgery, fraud, attempted theft by deception. Oregon takes estate fraud very seriously. If convicted, he could face up to 5 years in prison and be required to pay restitution. Will it go to trial? Depends on whether he's smart enough to take a plea deal. But Rebecca, I need you to understand something. This is going to destroy your relationship with your brother permanently. There's no coming back from criminal charges. I thought about Lily's face at that dinner table, the way her small body had gone rigid with fear. I thought about Derek's sneer, his certainty that I was too weak, too female, too insignificant to fight back. I thought about grandmother Martha, who had worked as a school teacher for 40 years to buy that house, who had raised Derek and me with equal love and equal discipline, who would have been horrified to know her grandson was using her death for his own greed. He destroyed that relationship himself, I said. I'm just making sure he faces the consequences. Catherine nodded slowly. Then let's build the case. Over the next 2 weeks, I learned more about my brother's financial situation than I'd ever wanted to know. Catherine had contacts with a forensic accountant who agreed to review Derek's publicly available financial records as a professional courtesy. What emerged was a portrait of systematic financial fraud. Derek had been living beyond his means for at least 5 years. The luxury cars were all leased or financed with minimal down payments. The designer clothes Vanessa wore in her Instagram posts were bought on credit cards that carried balances in the tens of thousands. Their mortgage was underwater, the house worth less than they owed. The investment property Derek had mentioned wasn't an investment at all. It was a desperate attempt to flip a distressed property, one that required cash he didn't have. But the real discovery came when the forensic accountant found something else. Derek had been embezzling from his employer, small amounts at first, redirected commissions, inflated expense reports, then larger sums, falsified sales contracts, phantom clients. He'd stolen nearly $60,000 over 2 years, covering it up through increasingly complex manipulations of his sales database. He's going to get caught, Catherine said when she showed me the analysis. This kind of thing always comes out eventually. The question is whether it comes out before or after the will fraud case. Before, I said. It needs to come out before. She studied me for a long moment. You want him to lose everything at once. I want him to understand that actions have consequences, that you can't build a life on lies and theft and cruelty and expect it to stand, that someday someone is going to push back. Catherine made a call to a contact at Derek's company, a compliance officer she'd worked with on a previous case. She didn't provide specifics, just suggested they might want to audit their top performers' expense reports and commission structures, the kind of suggestion that came from a respected attorney and couldn't be ignored. Meanwhile, Derek was escalating. He'd hired his own attorney, a flashy personal injury lawyer who apparently thought volume was a substitute for competence. They'd filed a petition to probate the forged will, forcing me to file a counter-petition with the original. The judge had scheduled a hearing for 3 weeks away. My parents were caught in the middle, trying to remain neutral, but clearly devastated. My father had stopped answering Derek's calls after the third rant about my betrayal. My mother reported that Vanessa had blocked her on all social media platforms after she'd refused to post a statement supporting Derek's version of events. At work, I focused on my patients, the sick children who needed someone to be present and calm and competent, but my mind was always partially elsewhere, planning the next move, anticipating Derek's responses, building the web that would eventually trap him completely. Then came the call I'd been waiting for. Catherine's voice was tight with suppressed excitement. Rebecca, Derek's employer just launched an internal investigation. They found the falsified expense reports within 3 hours of looking. They're suspending him pending a full audit. When? This morning. He's been escorted out of the building. No severance, no final paycheck until the investigation concludes. And Rebecca, there's more. The compliance officer I spoke to, she's dating an FBI agent who specializes in white-collar crime. If the amount Derek stole exceeds $50,000, this becomes federal. I sat down slowly in the hospital break room, phone pressed to my ear. It exceeds $50,000. Then your brother is going to have much bigger problems than a disputed will. The hearing for grandmother's estate was scheduled for a Thursday morning in early November. I took the day off work, arranged for my neighbor to watch Lily after school, and met Catherine at the Multnomah County Courthouse at 8:30. The building was all marble and authority, every footstep echoing in the vaulted lobby. Derek arrived with his attorney, Marcus Flynn, a man who wore his expensive suit like armor and his law degree like a weapon. Vanessa trailed behind them, phone already out, already filming. Her Instagram stories from the past month had been a masterclass in manipulation, carefully edited clips portraying Derek as the grieving grandson, fighting for his rightful inheritance against his ungrateful, money-hungry sister. What her followers didn't see were the threatening messages Derek had sent me, the late-night calls where he'd screamed about destroying my nursing career, the attempts to turn our extended family against me. What they didn't know was that every message, every call, every post was being documented and added to the evidence file growing on Catherine's desk. We waited in the hallway outside the courtroom. Derek refused to look at me, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. Marcus Flynn was reviewing documents, occasionally whispering to Derek, who would nod or shake his head in response. Then Thomas Brenner arrived, and the temperature in the hallway seemed to drop 10 degrees. He was a heavy-set man in his early 60s, with thinning hair combed over a spotted scalp, and a suit that had been expensive once, but now strained at the buttons. His eyes, when they found me, were cold and calculating. Catherine stepped forward, positioning herself between me and Brenner. Thomas, Katie, still playing savior for lost causes? Still creating fraudulent documents for desperate clients? His smile didn't reach his eyes. Be careful with accusations you can't prove. I don't make accusations I can't prove, which is why the Bar Association is very interested in your files. Something flickered in his expression, quickly suppressed. They have no grounds for investigation. They have 3 prior complaints, a pattern of questionable estate documents, and now this. Catherine gestured toward Derek. Your luck has run out, Thomas. Before he could respond, the bailiff called us into the courtroom. Judge Sarah Hendricks presided. A woman in her late 50s known for her no-nonsense approach and low tolerance for fraud. She reviewed the documents before her with meticulous attention, occasionally making notes, her face revealing nothing. Marcus Flynn presented Derek's case first, arguing that the newer will represented grandmother Martha's final wishes, that she had chosen to leave her primary asset to her grandson, who bore the family name and had the business acumen to properly manage the property. He painted me as emotional, unstable, jealous of my brother's success. Your Honor, he concluded, this is clearly a case of sibling rivalry taken to an unfortunate extreme. My client's grandmother wanted her legacy preserved by the Morrison man who could honor her memory appropriately, not divided and likely sold off piecemeal by a single mother who lacks the resources to maintain such a valuable property. The misogyny was blatant, the implication clear. Women, especially single mothers, couldn't be trusted with real assets. I kept my face neutral, but inside I was cataloging every word for the civil suit Catherine had suggested we file once the criminal case concluded. Then it was Catherine's turn. She stood, smoothed her jacket, and addressed the judge with quiet confidence. Your Honor, the will presented by Mr. Morrison and Mr. Brenner has several fatal flaws that go beyond mere questions of authenticity. First, the date. This will is purportedly signed on July 15th, 2023. Mrs. Martha Morrison passed away on April 2nd, 2023, a fact verified by her death certificate, which I've submitted as Exhibit C. Judge Hendricks looked up sharply. The will is dated 3 months after the decedent's death? Yes, Your Honor. An obvious impossibility. Second, the witnesses listed on this document, a Margaret Patterson and a Robert Yates, do not exist in any Oregon Public Records database. No driver's licenses, no voter registrations, no property records. They appear to be entirely fictional. Marcus Flynn was on his feet. Your Honor, these are clerical errors easily explained by— Sit down, Mr. Flynn. Judge Hendricks's voice was ice. She turned to Brenner. Mr. Brenner, did you prepare this document? Thomas Brenner stood slowly. Yes, Your Honor. Acting on the instructions of my client, Derek Morrison, based on verbal wishes he reported from his grandmother before her death. Verbal wishes that contradicted a properly executed will filed 2 years earlier with a different attorney? Mrs. Morrison had the right to change her mind about the disposition of her property. She did. What she didn't have was the right to sign documents after her death. Judge Hendrix's tone could have frozen water. What we have here is either extraordinary incompetence or deliberate fraud. Given Mr. Brenner's history, which I took the time to review last night, I'm inclined toward the latter. The courtroom went silent. Derek's face had gone pale. Vanessa had lowered her phone for the first time, her perfectly made-up face showing real fear. Catherine continued, Your Honor, we have the original will, properly filed and executed, leaving the Laurelhurst property equally to both grandchildren. We have testimony from the original attorney confirming its authenticity. We have no credible evidence that Mrs. Morrison ever wished to change these terms. What we do have is evidence that Mr. Derek Morrison had significant financial motivations to claim sole ownership of a property currently valued at $890,000. Judge Hendrix made a note. Does the state have an interest in this matter? Yes, Your Honor. A woman I hadn't noticed before stood from the back of the courtroom. Assistant District Attorney Carmen Rodriguez. The state is investigating possible forgery and estate fraud in this case. We request that these proceedings be stayed pending resolution of the criminal investigation. Derek's attorney was on his feet again. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. There's no evidence of criminal wrongdoing. Just a dispute over which of two wills represents the true wishes of Mr. Flynn. I'm going to stop you right there. Judge Hendrix removed her glasses and fixed him with a stare that could melt steel. I've been a probate judge for 15 years. I've seen contested wills, disputed estates, family disagreements over property. What I have not seen is a will signed 3 months after the testator's death with non-existent witnesses. This isn't a dispute. This is fraud. She turned to the court reporter. Let the record show that I am invalidating the will dated July 15th, 2023, on grounds of obvious fraud. The original will dated March 3rd, 2021, is hereby recognized as the valid last testament of Martha Louise Morrison. The property at 2847 Laurelhurst Drive is to be divided equally between Rebecca Ann Morrison and Derek James Morrison as specified therein. Derek made a sound, something between a gasp and a moan. Vanessa grabbed his arm. Marcus Flynn was gathering his papers with sharp, angry movements. Furthermore, Judge Hendrix continued, I am referring this matter to the Oregon State Bar Association for investigation of Mr. Thomas Brenner's conduct and to the District Attorney's Office for potential criminal prosecution of all parties involved in the creation and presentation of this fraudulent document. She looked directly at Derek. Mr. Morrison, you attempted to defraud your sister out of her lawful inheritance using a forged document. The state will determine what criminal penalties are appropriate. This court determines that you have acted in bad faith and awards attorney's fees and court costs to Ms. Rebecca Morrison in the amount of $12,400 to be paid within 30 days. The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. As we filed out, Derek tried to approach me. Catherine stepped between us immediately, but I could see his face over her shoulder. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked like panic. Rebecca, please. Can we talk about this? I made a mistake. I can fix this. No, I said simply. You can't. I'm your brother. Family is supposed to forgive. You threw my dinner on the floor in front of my daughter and told me I wasn't family anymore. Remember? You made your choice, Derek. Now you get to live with the consequences. Vanessa was crying, actual tears running through her foundation. You're destroying our lives. We're going to lose everything. You're destroying your own lives. I'm just making sure it's documented properly. As I walked away with Catherine, I heard Marcus Flynn on his phone, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. Yes, I understand. No, I'm withdrawing from the case immediately. Find yourself new representation, Mr. Morrison. Even Derek's lawyer was abandoning him. The rats were fleeing the sinking ship. Catherine and I had lunch at a small cafe 2 blocks from the courthouse. She ordered a glass of wine despite it being barely noon. That was one of the most satisfying hearings of my career, she admitted. Hendrix doesn't play games. Once she saw that date discrepancy, Derek was finished. What happens now? Now, the district attorney's office builds their criminal case. They'll subpoena Brenner's files, interview Derek, probably offer him a plea deal if he testifies against Brenner. But Rebecca, there's something else you should know. She pulled out her phone and showed me an email. It was from Derek's former employer, forwarded through Catherine's compliance officer contact. The subject line read, Criminal Referral, Embezzlement Investigation. They finished their audit, Catherine explained. Derek stole $67,000 over 26 months. They're filing charges with the FBI today. I set down my sandwich, my appetite suddenly gone. Federal charges? Wire fraud, likely. He used electronic transfers and email to facilitate the theft. That makes it federal jurisdiction. He's looking at separate state charges for the will fraud and federal charges for the embezzlement. How much prison time? Conservative estimate, 5 to 7 years total, assuming he pleads guilty to everything and cooperates. If he fights it and loses at trial, could be 10 to 15. I thought about Lily. About the nephew or niece she'd never have now that Derek's life was imploding. I thought about my parents. who would watch their only son go to prison. I thought about Vanessa, whose Instagram perfect life was about to become very public disaster. And I thought about Derek standing over me in my parents' dining room, his face twisted with contempt, telling me I wasn't worthy of my own grandmother's love. Good, I said. The federal charges hit the news 3 days later. Local luxury car salesman charged with wire fraud and embezzlement. The Oregonian ran the story with a photo of Derek being led from the FBI field office in downtown Portland, his hands cuffed in front of him, his expensive suit rumpled, his face a mask of shock. Vanessa's Instagram went silent for the first time in 3 years. Then it disappeared entirely. Account deleted, thousands of carefully curated photos of her fake perfect life erased in a moment. I wondered if she understood yet that the lifestyle she'd flaunted was built entirely on stolen money and lies. My mother called that evening, her voice raw from crying. "Rebecca, they arrested him. The FBI came to his house at 6 in the morning. Vanessa called me hysterical. I know, Mom. I saw the news. Can you help him? Can you talk to your attorney? See if there's anything that can be done?" I closed my eyes and counted to 10 before responding. "Mom, Derek committed federal crimes. He stole money from his employer. He forged grandmother's will. He tried to defraud me out of $400,000. There's nothing I can do, and even if there was, I wouldn't. But he's your brother. He's my son. How can you just stand by and watch this happen to him?" I'm not watching it happen to him. I'm watching him face the consequences of his own choices. There's a difference. Your father won't speak to you. He says you've destroyed this family. The words hurt more than I wanted to admit, but I kept my voice steady. Derek destroyed this family when he chose greed over honesty, when he chose his ego over his sister, when he threw food at me in front of my 7-year-old daughter and told me I wasn't worthy of being a Morrison. I didn't do this to him, Mom. He did it to himself. She was quiet for a long moment. I keep thinking about when you two were little. You'd fight like cats and dogs, but if anyone else tried to hurt one of you, the other would be there instantly. When did that change? When Derek started measuring his worth in dollars and status instead of character. The preliminary hearing for the federal charges was set for December. The state charges for will fraud were proceeding separately, Thomas Brenner having already been disbarred and facing his own criminal trial. He'd tried to make a deal, offering to testify against Derek in exchange for a reduced sentence, but the district attorney wasn't interested. They had enough evidence to convict both men without anyone's cooperation. I attended every hearing, sitting in the back of the courtroom in my scrubs when my shift allowed, in jeans and a sweater on my days off. Derek never looked at me, his eyes always fixed forward or on his new attorney, a public defender who looked about 12 years old and completely overwhelmed. Vanessa appeared at the first hearing, her designer outfit swapped for Target basics, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail instead of her usual elaborate styling. She'd gotten a job, I'd heard through my mother, working as a hostess at a chain restaurant. The Instagram influencer career was over, her followers having evaporated once the carefully maintained illusion shattered. The evidence against Derek was overwhelming. Emails to Brenner discussing the new will and how to make it look legitimate. Text messages about needing the house money immediately to cover his debts. Financial records showing the embezzlement. Each false expense report and redirected commission meticulously documented. And through it all, Vanessa's Instagram posts and videos, the unintentional documentation of a lifestyle that Derek's legitimate income couldn't possibly support. The video from the Sunday dinner became Exhibit A in the state's case. Vanessa had deleted it from Instagram, but not before several people had downloaded it. The prosecutors played it in court, Derek's voice booming through the speakers. "You have 30 minutes to get out of my family. That house is mine by right." I watched the jury's faces as they saw my brother slap my plate across the room, saw him loom over me, saw 7-year-old Lily freeze in terror. 3 of the jurors were mothers themselves. 2 had tears in their eyes. Derek's attorney tried to argue that the video showed nothing about the will fraud, that it was simply a family argument taken out of context. The prosecutor countered that it showed Derek's belief that he alone deserved the inheritance, his willingness to use intimidation and violence to get what he wanted, his character and state of mind when he approached Thomas Brenner about creating the false will. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes before returning a guilty verdict on all counts: forgery, fraud, attempted theft by deception. The federal jury took slightly longer, 4 hours, before convicting him of wire fraud and embezzlement. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 weeks later, both cases to be heard on the same day. Catherine explained that the judges would coordinate to ensure the sentences ran consecutively rather than concurrently, meaning Derek would serve the full time for both sets of crimes. "He's going to allocution," she told me over coffee the day before sentencing. His attorney thinks if he shows remorse, takes responsibility, the judges might be more lenient. Will they be? Doubtful. Federal sentencing guidelines are pretty strict, and Judge Hendricks doesn't have a reputation for sympathy toward people who forge dead women's wills. The sentencing hearing was packed with reporters, curious onlookers, and a few of Derek's former colleagues who'd come to watch his fall from grace. My parents sat on the opposite side of the courtroom from me, my father's face carved from stone, my mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Derek stood before Judge Hendricks first, his public defender beside him. He'd lost weight in the months since his arrest, his expensive suit now hanging loose on his frame. When asked if he wanted to make a statement, he nodded. "Your Honor, I want to apologize to this court, to my family, and especially to my sister Rebecca." His voice was hoarse, barely audible. "I was in a bad financial situation and I made terrible choices. I hurt people who trusted me. I betrayed my grandmother's memory. I don't have an excuse, just an explanation that I was desperate and scared, and I let that desperation turn me into someone I don't recognize." He turned to look at me for the first time in months. "Rebecca, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I said at dinner, for trying to steal your inheritance, for everything. You deserved better from your brother." The apology felt hollow, performed for the court rather than genuine remorse. But I kept my face neutral, refusing to give him the satisfaction of any reaction. Judge Hendricks listened without expression. When Derek finished, she consulted her notes and began to speak. "Mr. Morrison, you have been convicted of forging your grandmother's will in an attempt to steal approximately $450,000 from your sister. This wasn't a crime of passion or a momentary lapse in judgment. You researched lawyers, found one willing to help you commit fraud, created false documents, and presented them as legitimate in a court of law. You lied to your family, to this court, and to yourself about who you are and what you're capable of." She paused, letting the words sink in. "The state sentencing guidelines recommend 2 to 4 years for fraud of this magnitude. However, I'm mindful that you have also been convicted in federal court of stealing from your employer, showing a pattern of deception and theft that goes beyond a single incident. Therefore, I sentence you to 5 years in the Oregon State Correctional Institution, with eligibility for parole after serving 60% of your sentence." Derek's shoulders slumped. 5 years was the maximum for his state crimes. The federal judge, a stern man named Robert Crawford, was next. His courtroom was more formal, more intimidating. Derek stood again, this time without being asked to speak. Judge Crawford had no interest in allocution. "Mr. Morrison, you stole $67,000 from your employer over a period of 26 months. This was systematic, calculated theft. You created false documents, manipulated databases, and lied to cover your tracks. The federal sentencing guidelines are clear. I sentence you to 7 years in federal prison, to run consecutively to your state sentence. You will also pay restitution of $67,000 plus interest, and you are banned from working in any financial or sales capacity for 10 years following your release. 12 years total. Derek would be 50 years old when he got out, his prime earning years gone, his reputation destroyed, his life in ruins. As the marshals led him away, he looked at me one last time. There was no anger in his eyes now, no contempt. Just a broken understanding that he'd bet everything on his own arrogance and lost. The house at 2847 Laurelhurst Drive stood quiet in the January rain, its Victorian gingerbread trim dripping water, its windows dark. I'd driven past it dozens of times since grandmother's death, but hadn't gone inside until today, the day the estate officially settled, and I received the keys to my half of the property. Catherine had negotiated a settlement that allowed me to buy out Derek's portion at a reduced price. Since a convicted felon's interest in property was significantly devalued and he desperately needed money for his restitution payments, I'd paid $200,000 for his half of a house worth nearly $900,000, using a combination of my savings, a small mortgage, and a loan from my parents who had finally accepted that Derek was entirely responsible for his own destruction. Lily held my hand as we climbed the front steps. She'd been here many times when Grandmother Martha was alive, but not since the funeral. "It smells like great-grandma's cookies," she whispered as I unlocked the door. The house did smell familiar, like lemon polish and old books, and the lavender sachets grandmother had kept in every closet. The furniture was still in place, covered with dust cloths, waiting. My parents had been maintaining it but couldn't bring themselves to move anything, as if keeping it unchanged might somehow bring their mother back. I walked through the room slowly, remembering. The kitchen where grandmother had taught me to make pie crust. The living room where she'd helped me with algebra homework while Derek played video games. The sunroom where she'd kept her plants and her mysteries, claiming the orchids helped her think through the plots. Upstairs, the bedrooms were frozen in time. Grandmother's room still had her reading glasses on the nightstand, a bookmark holding her place in a Ruth Ware novel she'd never finish. The guest room where I'd stayed during my divorce still had my old textbooks on the shelf. And Derek's room, the one he'd claimed during high school and college, was a shrine to his former self. Football trophies, debate team medals, framed certificates of achievement. All the evidence of the golden boy he'd been before greed and ego had poisoned him. Lily tugged on my hand. "Mommy, can this be my room?" I looked down at my daughter, her dark eyes so like mine, her small face still carrying traces of the fear from that awful Sunday dinner. She deserved better than a tiny apartment and a stressed-out mother working double shifts. She deserved space to play, a yard for a swing set, a neighborhood with good schools and safe streets. Yeah, baby, this can be your room. We spent the afternoon cleaning, opening windows despite the cold to air out months of stillness. My parents arrived with lunch and helped us carry in the first load of boxes from my apartment. My father worked in silence, his grief for his son still too raw for conversation, but his presence was a statement. I'm here for you and Lily, even if I failed Derek. By evening, we'd made the house habitable, sheets on the beds, food in the refrigerator, Lily's stuffed animals arranged on her new bedroom shelves. As we sat in the kitchen eating takeout pizza, my mother finally spoke about Derek. He called from prison yesterday, asked if we'd put money in his commissary account. What did you tell him? I told him we'd think about it. Your father said no immediately, but I'm not sure I can just abandon him completely. He's still my son. I understood the conflict, the mother's instinct to protect her child even when that child had proven himself unworthy of protection. Mom, if you want to help him, that's your choice. But you need to understand that Derek hasn't changed. That phone call wasn't about apologizing or taking responsibility. It was about what he could get from you. She nodded slowly. His attorney said he's trying to appeal the federal conviction, claiming the evidence was obtained improperly or something. He's convinced himself he's the victim in all this. Of course he is, because admitting he's the villain would require self-awareness he's never had. 3 months later, on a perfect April morning, exactly 1 year after Grandmother Martha's death, I sat on the front porch of my house with a cup of coffee and watched Lily play in the yard. She'd made friends with the neighbor kids, was thriving in her new school, had stopped having nightmares about Uncle Derek's red face and angry voice. My phone buzzed with an email from Catherine. Derek's appeal had been denied. All 12 years of his sentence would stand. Furthermore, the Ninth Circuit had issued a scathing opinion about his attempt to use procedural technicalities to escape responsibility for clear and convincing evidence of systematic fraud. There was a postscript to her email. Vanessa filed for divorce last week, citing financial infidelity and emotional abuse. She's also suing Derek for her share of their marital assets. What little remains after the restitution payments and legal fees. Thought you'd want to know. So even his wife had abandoned him. Derek had lost everything. His freedom, his career, his marriage, his family, his reputation. He would spend the next decade in prison, and when he emerged, he'd be a middle-aged felon with no prospects and no one waiting for him. I should have felt satisfaction. This was the justice I'd sought, the consequences I'd insisted he face. But sitting there in the morning sun, watching my daughter laugh as she chased butterflies through the garden Grandmother had planted, I felt something more complex, not forgiveness. Derek didn't deserve forgiveness, and I had no intention of offering it, but a kind of closure, a sense that the account was settled, and I could finally stop looking over my shoulder. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from my father. Can we come for Sunday dinner this week? I think it's time to start new traditions. I texted back immediately. Yes, bring Mom. We'll make Grandmother's pot roast. Later that week, I received an unexpected letter. Prison mail, Derek's name and inmate number in the return address. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity won. The letter was short, written in Derek's angular handwriting on prison commissary notebook paper. Rebecca, I know you won't forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness. But I need you to know that I understand now what I did to you, to Lily, to our family. Not because my attorney told me to say it, or because I think it will reduce my sentence. Because I have nothing but time now to think about the person I became and the person I should have been. You were right about everything. I was living beyond my means, stealing to support a lifestyle I couldn't afford, lying to myself about who I was. And when Grandmother died, and I saw that house, that money, I convinced myself I deserved it more than you because I was the man, the Morrison heir, the successful businessman. I didn't see you as my sister anymore, just as an obstacle to what I wanted. I destroyed myself, Rebecca. You just made sure I couldn't take you down with me. I won't contact you again. I won't ask for money or favors or forgiveness. I just needed you to know that Lily has a good mother. One who protected her from someone who would have hurt her through his own selfishness and greed. Thank you for being the parent in that moment that I failed to be as her uncle. Derek. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it in the drawer with all the other legal documents from the case. Evidence of the journey, the battle, the victory. Not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. Not reconciliation, but closure. That Sunday, my parents came for dinner. We sat at Grandmother's dining room table, the one Derek had stood over when he slapped my plate away. Lily said grace, thanking God for family and safety and her new room with the window seat. My father carved the pot roast with hands that shook slightly, and my mother served vegetables with tears in her eyes. We didn't talk about Derek. We talked about Lily's school play, about my father's new woodworking hobby, about my mother's book club. We talked about Grandmother and the memories we wanted to preserve, the stories we wanted Lily to know about her great-grandmother, who'd been a teacher and a gardener, and a fierce believer in equality. As we cleared the dishes, my mother pulled me aside in the kitchen. "I'm proud of you, Rebecca, for standing up for yourself, for protecting Lily, for being strong enough to let Derek face the consequences instead of trying to save him from himself." "I'm not sure it was strength, Mom. Sometimes I think it was just exhaustion. I was tired of being treated like I didn't matter. That's what strength is, honey, refusing to accept being diminished. Your grandmother would be proud of you, too." After they left, I tucked Lily into bed and stood at her window, looking out at the quiet street. The house that Derek had tried to steal was mine now, legally and completely. The inheritance grandmother had intended for me was secure. The justice I'd demanded had been delivered. But more than that, I'd proven to myself and to my daughter that standing up for yourself wasn't cruel or vindictive. It was necessary. That family didn't mean accepting abuse and fraud. That being quiet and accommodating and forgiving wouldn't protect you from people who saw kindness as weakness. Derek had called me bitter, jealous, a gold digger. He'd tried to make me doubt my worth, my value, my place in the Morrison family. And in the end, he'd lost everything while I'd gained a home, my dignity, and the knowledge that I was strong enough to fight for what was mine. 18 months after Derek's sentencing, on a crisp October morning that reminded me of that awful Sunday dinner, I received notification that his first parole hearing would be in 6 months. He'd served the minimum required time for his state sentence and was eligible for early release if the board determined he'd been rehabilitated. Catherine called me the same day. "You have the right to submit a victim impact statement and appear at the hearing if you choose. The parole board will consider your input when making their decision." What are his chances of getting out early? Honestly, slim. He'd still have to serve his federal time, and the feds don't offer parole. But if he's released from state custody, he'd transfer directly to federal prison, instead of serving the sentences consecutively. He could potentially be out in 7 years instead of 12. I thought about it for a week. Lily was 9 now, thriving in 4th grade. Her memories of Uncle Derek's cruelty fading into something distant and manageable thanks to therapy and stability. My parents had slowly rebuilt their relationship with me, though my father still carried guilt about not seeing Derek's true nature sooner. In the end, I decided to submit a written statement, but not appear in person. I didn't need to see Derek again, didn't need to give him the power of my physical presence. The letter I wrote was clinical, factual, devastating. To the Oregon State Parole Board, Derek Morrison attempted to defraud me of $450,000 through forgery and fraud. He verbally abused me in front of my young daughter and threatened to destroy my life when I refused to help him continue his financial crimes. He has shown no genuine remorse, only regret at being caught. I do not support his early release. He should serve his full sentence as determined by the courts. The victims of his crimes, myself, his former employer, and the justice system itself, deserve to see consequences completed, not abbreviated for convenience. Rebecca Ann Morrison. The parole hearing took place in March. Derek was denied early release. According to the official report, the board found insufficient evidence of rehabilitation and noted that he'd been written up twice for disciplinary infractions in prison, including attempting to manipulate other inmates in a commissary scheme. Even in prison, Derek couldn't stop trying to con people. Life moved forward. Lily turned 10, then 11. I was promoted to head nurse of the pediatric unit. I dated occasionally, but kept my focus on my daughter and my career and the house that grandmother had left me. I planted roses in the garden, updated the kitchen with modern appliances, created a life that was stable and safe and mine. My parents became regular fixtures, Sunday dinners resuming with new traditions and no tension. My father built Lily a treehouse in the backyard. My mother taught her to knit. We were healing, slowly, around the Derek-shaped hole in our family. I heard about Derek sporadically, usually through my mother, who still accepted his occasional collect calls from prison. He'd been transferred to a federal facility in California. He was taking correspondence courses, claiming he was becoming a paralegal to help other inmates. He'd found religion, she reported, was attending chapel services and Bible study. I didn't believe any of it. Derek had always been a chameleon, adapting his personality to match what he thought people wanted to see. In business, he'd been the aggressive closer. At family dinners, he'd been the dutiful son. In court, he'd been the remorseful penitent. Now in prison, he was the reformed sinner. But I knew the truth. Derek wasn't capable of genuine change because he fundamentally didn't believe he'd done anything wrong. He saw himself as a victim of circumstances, of bad luck, of a sister who wouldn't help him when he needed it. 5 years after his sentencing, Vanessa remarried. My mother showed me the Facebook post. Vanessa in a simple white dress beside a bearded man who managed a hardware store in Eugene. The caption talked about second chances and finding real love and learning that happiness didn't come from material things. I wondered if she'd learned anything from her marriage to Derek, or if she was just performing redemption for her new audience. Either way, she'd moved on while Derek remained locked up. 7 years after that Sunday dinner on a random Tuesday in spring, I was working late at the hospital when I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. This is a prepaid call from Derek Morrison, an inmate at FCI Sheridan, to accept charges, press 1. I pressed 1. Curiosity overcoming my better judgment. Rebecca. Derek's voice was older, rougher, the arrogance ground away by years of incarceration. I know you said I shouldn't contact you, but I needed to tell you something. They're releasing me in 2 months. I've served my time, and I'm getting out. Congratulations, I said flatly. I'm not calling to ask for anything. I'm not going to try to see you or Lily or anyone in the family. I'm being released to a halfway house in Salem, and I'm going to rebuild my life far away from Portland. From you. Good. But I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Really sorry, not the performance I gave in court. You were right about everything. I was a selfish, greedy asshole who destroyed his own life and tried to take you down with me. You stopped me, and you had every right to. I leaned back in my office chair, looking out at the hospital parking lot where rain was beginning to fall. Is there a question in there, Derek, or are you just looking for absolution? No question. No expectation of forgiveness, just acknowledgement that you won. Completely and totally. You got the house, the family, the life. I got exactly what I deserved. Yes, I agreed. You did. There was a long silence. Then, how's Lily? Mom said she's doing well in school. Lily is fine. She barely remembers you, which is exactly what I wanted. Good. That's good. She deserves better than an uncle in prison. The automated voice cut in, warning that we had 1 minute remaining. Rebecca, I'm going to hang up now, and you'll never hear from me again. But I needed you to know that what you did, standing up to me, refusing to back down, probably saved my life. If you'd let me steal that money, I'd have spiraled further. Prison gave me time to understand what I'd become. So thank you, I guess, for being strong enough to let me fall. Goodbye, Derek. Goodbye, Rebecca. Tell Lily her uncle hopes she has a wonderful life. The line went dead. I sat in my office for a long time after, processing the conversation. Derek had sounded genuine, but I'd learned not to trust his performances. Still, there was something different in his voice, a brokenness that seemed real rather than manufactured. Not that it mattered. He'd served his time, would be released, and would presumably try to rebuild some kind of life with his record and restrictions, but he'd never have what he'd tried to steal from me. Never have the house, the family connection, the respect he'd thrown away. I drove home through the rain to the Victorian on Laurelhurst Drive, where lights glowed in the windows and Lily was probably doing homework at the kitchen table. My house, my daughter, my life, built not on lies and theft and fraud, but on hard work and boundaries and refusing to be diminished. Derek had tried to make me small, had tried to convince me I didn't deserve my grandmother's love or legacy, and in the end, he'd lost everything while I'd gained the one thing he'd never understood, the knowledge that true worth isn't measured in money or status or gender, but in integrity and courage, and the strength to stand up for yourself when everyone tells you to back down. Grandmother Martha had known that. She'd left her house to both of us equally because she believed in fairness, in merit, in judging people by their character rather than their chromosomes. Derek had rejected that wisdom, had convinced himself that being male made him more deserving. He'd spent 7 years in prison learning otherwise. I pulled into my driveway, smiled at the sight of the porch light Lily always turned on for me, and walked into my home. The home Derek had tried to steal but had only succeeded in giving me completely. The physical manifestation of justice served and consequences delivered, and a woman who refused to be anyone's victim. That night, after Lily was asleep, I pulled Derek's letter from the drawer where I'd kept it, the one where he'd acknowledged his guilt and thanked me for protecting my daughter. I read it one last time, then did something I should have done years ago. I burned it, not out of anger or spite, but because I didn't need it anymore, didn't need his acknowledgement or apology or absolution. I'd won completely, and his opinion of that victory was irrelevant. The ashes went into the trash, the drawer closed. The chapter ended, and I went upstairs to kiss my sleeping daughter goodnight, grateful that she was growing up in a house built on truth rather than lies, with a mother who'd shown her that standing up for yourself wasn't cruel or vindictive, it was necessary and right, and sometimes the most loving thing you could do. Derek had called it revenge, but it wasn't revenge, it was justice. And justice, unlike revenge, didn't require forgiveness or reconciliation, or healing the relationship. Justice just required consequences. And consequences, Derek had finally learned, were something even Morrison men couldn't escape.